Hi, it's Steve Palladino with Palladino Power Project, and I'm bringing you part two in this short video series on resilience, durability, and fatigue resistance, and using stride metrics to assess these elements of running performance. And this is last time I did part one. I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video. When I covered part one, I covered this report that you see on the right, which is in WKO, uses stride data. And basically, talked about two different reports. One compares the second half of a run or race to the first half in terms of these various metrics. The other report compares the last third of a run or race versus the first third of the race or run. And what we look at is percentage of difference at the end versus the beginning, or the second half versus the first half. In the last video, I used race data to go over this report and show you some of the changes that you could see between the latter part and the first part of these races. In this video, I'm going to use a single runner's set of long runs to take a look at these various elements to assess those long runs side by side. So stay tuned. Let's get into it and go over those long runs. So what we have here is the data from three runs, same runner, each of them 1 week apart. They're all long runs. June 21, 28, July 5th, they're 1 week apart. The first one, June 21, the long run prescription was 13 miles with 3 times 4 minutes and 30 seconds at 97 to 100% of CP in the first part of the run, and on the back side of the run, 7 times 1 minute at 106 to 110% of CP. The second run, June 28th, was identical in terms of prescription. The reason is the runner had a rough time with the first trial. For whatever reasons, whether it's accumulated fatigue from during the week or sleep or what have you, the runner had a tough time with the first one. Did good, but had a tough time with it. So instead of progressing, we repeated that same workout a week later. Now we have the conditions. So the conditions were a little bit more rough early on than later on. Okay, so that was good. But then a week later, after this one, which he did much better, we did progress. So we bumped it to 3 times 5 minutes, 8 times 1 minutes, and from 13 miles in these two to 14 miles on July 5th. Same prescription in terms of intensity, a little bit more intensity volume within the long run, and a little bit longer, 1 mile longer in terms of total distance. This was in a little bit tougher conditions than even the first two, sort of a warming trend. So let's look at the second half versus the first half, the percentage of change that was seen. So in the first one, this is the one that was a little bit rough. The power was 5% or 5.6% lower in the second half than the first half. That makes sense. And speed particularly dropped off because running effectiveness dropped off considerably, 4.3% lower running effectiveness. Now, part of that dynamic there, particularly running effectiveness, is that the course was a little bit more hilly in the second half than the first half. He did a little bit more climbing, a little less descending in the second half versus the first half. Air power is a little bit higher, and temperature was lower in the second half than the first half, but which would help mitigate the power. But these other aspects would probably be the source of the running effectiveness dropping more so than just the fatigue component, although we can't eliminate that as a possibility. But let's look at some of the other metrics. Horizontal power ratio dropped, form power ratio increased, and that's not atypical in a fatiguing scenario. Form power is that power that goes into moving the center of mass side to side and up and down, where horizontal power is the complement to form power, the percentage or the component of power moving the center of mass forward horizontally. So usually in a fatiguing situation, we see horizontal power ratio decline, form power ratio increase, power to ground contact time. We mentioned that last time. Power in a fatigue scenario, power is declining, ground contact time is increasing. So by putting the ground contact time in the denominator and the power in the numerator, it enhances the ability or makes it a little bit more sensitive to fatigue. And look at this, 13% lower. So that's pretty significant. Leg spring stiffness dropped. Impact loading rate, which is a stride metric, declined. Now that's unusual because in a fatiguing scenario, impact loading rate increases. Mechanical fatigue causes impact loading rate to increase. However, the confounder here is that he was doing more climbing, less descending, which would cause higher, more descending, impact loading rate is going to be higher. More climbing, impact loading rate is going to be lower. So these are confounders for what we saw with impact loading rate. So it eliminates the capacity for impact loading rate to tell us much about fatigue because of the route in this case, climbing versus descending. Ground contact increase, as I mentioned up here, we have power declining, ground contact increasing. That causes this one to be more sensitive to fatigue. So those are all fatigue metrics. Flight phase was decreased significantly. So that's, you spend less time in the air, more time on the ground, basically. And we see some other metrics. Heart rate decoupling was 12.2%. That's pretty significant. All right, so he said he had a rough time. He got through it okay, but he had a rough time, and these numbers do not lie. They go along with that. And then the following week, now conditions were maybe a little bit more favorable, but he had a second chance at it. Now look at it. It's much better. Power only declined 1.3% in the second half. Speed actually increased. Running effectiveness increased. Part of that was he sort of did a different route. And you can see climbing decreased in the second half. Descending increased in the second half. And the hilliness decreased. All right. So in this scenario, you would expect that running effectiveness might increase a little bit. And with fatigue, maybe cut back just a little bit, but you can't make a strict determination on whether and what was going on with fatigue. I think this number here, the increase in running effectiveness by 2.3% is because of the course characteristics, just like this one reflected the course characteristics. Horizontal power ratio, I said that usually declines in fatigue. It declined less. Form power increases in fatigue. It increased less. I mean, these are negligible. These are, minus 1.3% power. These numbers here, power to ground contact time decreased only 0.3%. So stayed pretty steady. And that's a great sign that he did not fatigue in this particular run in the second half versus the first half like he did in the first one. In this case, impact loading rate increased 4%, but remember there's more descending than climbing. So there's a little confounding in that particular number. Ground contact time actually got a little bit less. This is essentially the same. Got a little bit less, which would go along with a little bit more speed. And then, of course, these other numbers. Heart rate decoupling was better, only 8.1%. All right, then take it 1 week further. Now we're in tougher conditions and a little bit harder prescription. So we increased the time at near threshold. We increased the number of reps that were 106 to 110%, and we added a mile total to the long run. So we can see that the route was somewhat similar to the prior week. Air power actually increased, which would lower the running effectiveness. That would be the confounder there. So even though the course characteristics were similar, the air power increase would lower the running effectiveness. So again, this number is more consistent with the confounders. But what we see here is power declined only 2%, which is still better than this one. Speed declined 1% because power declined 2%, running effectiveness only increased 1%, and so speed decreased. Very similar numbers for horizontal power ratio and form power ratio, meaning not much signs of fatigue. Yeah, a little bit, but not really big time. Power to ground contact time was, again, near flat. So this was really good in my mind. Impact loading rate was higher, and that's higher in a similar type of course. So this is an indicator of some fatigue. Besides the confounders, there's some indicator of fatigue, mechanical fatigue in the impact loading rate. Leg spring stiffness increased, which I believe is probably a confounded. Ground contact time, again, almost flat, but it did go down a little bit. That's pretty good, actually. And we'll fast forward through these numbers down to heart rate decoupling. That's even better. When you have these kind of conditions and to see heart rate decoupling and temperature actually increased 5% during the course of this run, whereas the prior week it increased only about 2%, that's really good. So he is getting overall, we're throwing more at him, and mechanically and metabolically, he's showing no further signs of fatigue than he did with a less aggressive prescription and in harder conditions. Let's take another quick look at the other chart. Same runs. So we're doing the same runs, but we're looking at the final third versus the first third. All right. So I'm not going to go into as much detail because I've already explained some of the confounders involved and so forth. But let's look here. Let's look at horizontal power ratio, form power ratio. This one actually improved, and that decreased first third versus final third versus first third. Same thing here, where we saw in this tougher run, we saw them more signs of fatigue, comparing final third to first third. So that's a pretty significant flip-flop there in terms of a reveal for fatigue. These are pretty good numbers right here. Power to ground contact time actually improved final third versus first third. So that's pretty good in both of those runs, whereas it had that big drop there, power ground contact time, minus almost 15% between the first third to the last third. Heart rate decoupling, again, more enhanced because we're not looking at just the half versus half. We're looking at the beginning where heart rate is a little bit more stable and less stress versus the very end. And even then, we're seeing a little bit lower, about the same, but definitely these two runs lower heart rate decoupling than what we saw in that first run. So this report, both of them, the second half versus first half, final third versus the first third, they are showing, they're revealing evidence of fatigue, and we're finding that some of these are more powerful, more sensitive, like power to ground contact time, but they all have some degree, but we have to watch out for the confounding in all of these. So thank you for watching this one, evaluating some long runs. We're going to come back for part 3 in not too long into the future, and what I'll be going over is some of my early attempts at looking at these particular metrics, at least some of these key ones, over time, so we can assess, are things changing with similar types of runs over a period of months or even over a period of a year or more. So stick around for that next part 3, and next time. And thank you for watching this time. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.